Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the August Executive. We were just commenting we should have lots of viewers this evening from the general public. There's no football, no Olympics. What was the other one?
No cricket.
No cricket. So we've probably doubled from 1 to 2 now. But you're very welcome. Let's kick off with apologies for absence, please, Ms Willis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So Councillor Alan Ashbury and Councillor Leanne McIntyre sent apologies.
Thank you. And the minutes from the previous 3 meetings, I believe. So a shame Democratic Services aren't paid by the meeting, otherwise July would have been a fantastic month, I think, on balance. Has anybody got any questions or issues with the minutes? Am I okay to sign them? Okay. While I'm doing that, we can move on to declarations of interest. Anybody got anything they wish to declare with respect to this evening's agenda? Yes, please, Morgan.
Thank you, Leader. Just with regards to item 10, the Deepcut Village Centre S106 spend options. It's a non-pecuniary interest. I am a council appointed.
Just stand by while we get that fixed. It's a bit squeaky in here. I'm not sure what you guys are hearing online, but Morgan's been amplified quite heavily.
I'll go quickly. It's a non-pecuniary interest as I'm a council-appointed representative on the Deepcut Village Association, which is the management organisation of the Deepcut Village Centre. I come to the meeting with a clear mind and no declared position.
Thank you, Councillor Rise. Any other declarations of interest? No? Okay, I've got to mention we've got Mr Watson standing in for Mr Stevens, who we've let out for good behaviour today. Minimum term of 50%, I think, is now valid, so he's been let out mid-month.
It's overflowing prisons again.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right, so we move on to public question time, as I seem to think we haven't had any questions registered by the deadline. Is that correct? Yeah, okay, so no public questions. Questions by members? Anybody? Councillor Rowlands, please. Could you press the button, please? Thank you.
In the light of the large amount spent on rectifying RAC problems at Camberley Theatre, what are the prospects of offering, for instance, serious music, drama and dance, for instance, as part of the programme when the theatre is back in action?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Rowlands. With regards to the programme at Camberley Theatre, as I said at the most recent executive to you, we have to consider the programme of shows and performances at Camberley Theatre with regards to for it to bring in revenue. It is something that I'm exploring with officers, which I'll be bringing to our working group with regards to the culture strategy. I can take that away, however, I am acutely aware of the needs of the programme, the schedule of performances and the like at Camberley Theatre can't always make room for everything that we would like to do. However, I will take it away and I'll discuss with officers.
Please, Councillor Rowlands.
Chair, if I could come back on that. Isn't it a bit diminishing for this authority that there are cultural things happening in the church next door on a regular basis, but not happening in our own theatre? And isn't one of the objectives of spending so much money on rectifying it, getting up to a standard, that we begin to see it as a centre for artistic activity in the borough?
Maybe just before Councillor Rise comes in, we're spending the money just to stand still, to keep the place safe and to allow it to be an attractive place to visit. There is no specific investment in taking the cultural offer forward, just as a clarification. Although I know it's something that we were looking at as part of a strategic piece of work. Please, Councillor Rice.
I would start off just by potentially disagreeing with your kind of assessment of the theatre. I think the theatre does provide a valuable resource for the arts and culture within the borough. And I also do appreciate that there are a number of venues across the borough that also host cultural offerings. What I am trying to achieve with our arts and culture strategy is that the theatre does not need to be the be-all and end-all of the arts and performances and culture within the borough. It's a theatre that operates a professional and corporate service for the council. It brings in revenue, but it also has a wide variety of performances, and I think it does provide a clear opportunity for people. What I will also say is that the theatre is not always available, and sometimes I would say the cost of it cannot always be suitable for a variety of amateur groups. However, I will also point to a number of variety of amateur groups that do use the theatre. It's something I'm exploring and how we can encourage the arts across the borough. But I would say that the theatre doesn't have to be the only place where we do performance and arts and culture in the borough. I want there to be a borough-wide approach to it rather than it just being the theatre. The theatre, I think, as we stated, is there as a civic amenity, but also it provides a different type of arts and culture for the borough. So I would just take issue with the way that the question was worded, that we don't take it seriously. I would say that we do. There are a number of venues that we can use and that we should always encourage to use as well.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Thank you, Councillor Rowlands, for your questions. Councillor Wheeler, I think you've got your hand up.
I have indeed, thank you. It was just to say that I welcome the contact with the community with reference to the Community Governance Review, or CGR. However, having reviewed the questions, could you please tell me what the acceptance criteria is to move forward to a full CGR, as the responses are somewhat subjective? So if one person, for example, if one person feels that the current Windlesham Parish Council is not good value for money and that the CGR should go ahead, and one person feels that it is and that it shouldn't, where would the balance lie, and what percentage of responses are we looking for in order to make that decision?
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. I'm fairly sure that's not an executive function, but I will hand over to Mr. Ramtile.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for your question, Councillor Wheeler. So when the responses come in, then the officers will have to evaluate the responses and see if we can identify any trends, any meaningful data, and essentially then report to full council on the findings and present the data and the information to full council. It'll be for full council then to consider the officers' views and the presentation of the data, and for council then to make a decision that it thinks is appropriate based on that presentation. Okay.
Councillor Wheeler, any follow-up? Are you happy with that?
That's two different questions. Thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, we're trying to walk a line here between supporting the legitimate desires of the local community in Windlesham for Windlesham Village, that is, rather than Windlesham Parish, to be masters and mistresses of their own destiny, with the need to ensure we follow the law and ensure we also take account of the needs of the rest of the borough, because it'll be the money will come from the rest of the borough to pay for this exercise. So at the moment we have a small number, albeit influential, like yourself, Councillor Wheeler, noting that this is something desirable. and we need to try and test the water to see whether that is or is not the will of the people before we move forward to the next stage of consideration. So we'll take this very steady, one step at a time, and look for Mr. Ramptow's counsel throughout. Okay, no more. Oh, Councillor Rowlands, 3.
Chair, for more than a year, Surrey County Council has promised to build technical or devices to restrict speeding in Edward Avenue and Victoria Avenues in St Michael's, who is a natural route onto the ring road, but nothing has happened. Is there any way, bearing in mind people are suffering results of this over a long period of time, that we can remonstrate with Surrey County Council and request that more action be speeded up?
I'm sure there was no pun intended in that final comment, Councillor Rowlands, about speeding things up. I think it's a matter of note that Surrey County Council's lack of engagement with us on a number of issues, including this one, is sad for all of us. And thank you for raising your residents' concerns. I think all of the councillors here could probably come up with a couple of roads where we would feel similarly motivated if we had engagement from Surrey County Council. I suspect we won't see any progress in the short term. Councillor Ashbury will continue to try and champion these issues. I will also be happy to raise it at Surrey Leaders, this lack of engagement. We were promised a roadshow, that's also a bit of a pun, a roadshow from some of the Surrey portfolio holders to engage with the boroughs, but I don't think we've seen it. I think we also need to be pragmatic here. We're about, 9-10 months away from county elections, so I suspect it's not high on their priority list. But happy to take it on board, Councillor Rowlands. All I can suggest is that you keep plugging away as best you can. I think there is a standard email address. You know who the county councillor is. You know who the portfolio holder is. And I think if we all keep bombarding them sufficiently, then maybe we'll get some attention. Okay? Any more? No? Okay. I think Councillor Ashbury was hoping to support remotely, but I think I've had a message from him saying that he's having problems with signal somewhere down on the Côte d'Azur, I think. I don't know where he's got to on his holidays. But I think you're covering this item, aren't you, Lisa? Thank you. So we'll move on to item 6, the tenancy strategy.
Thank you. I'm pleased to bring forward this paper on behalf of Councillor Alan Ashbury, and on his behalf, and I'm sure everybody else's as well. I'd like to thank the officers who have worked tremendously hard to pull this strategy together. The requirement for a tenancy strategy was introduced with the Localism Act of 2011. It puts a duty on all housing authorities to have in place a strategy that sets out how social housing in its district should be let, whether they hold housing stock or not. It moved away from the concept of social housing being let on lifetime tenancies and introduced flexible tenancies. Flexible tenancies run for a set number of years, and then the tenants' circumstances are reassessed. If they're in a position to move into private accommodation, rented or home ownership, including shared ownership, their tenancy would be ended and they would be supported to move on. Flexible tenancies are generally for 5 or 7 years, although they could be shorter for certain client groups. As a non-stock holding authority, Surrey Heath was required to have a tenancy strategy that set out how we would like housing association homes to be let. Housing associations do not have to let their homes in accordance with the strategy, but are required to have regard to it. There are no powers to compel compliance with the strategy, and while the council could say that we would rather a housing association does not operate in the area if they don't follow the strategy, this would potentially limit the development activity, which is effectively market-led. Accent Housing never adopted flexible tenancies as their focus is on tenancy sustainment, i.e. keeping tenants in homes for life. This is mainly informed by issues of under-occupation and harder to let properties in the north. Some other housing associations operating in the borough did adopt flexible tenancies of 7 years. However, most have moved back to lifetime tenancies, and since its introducing, the housing team are not aware of a single tenant who has been asked to move when their circumstances were reviewed. The Council's position has been that flexible tenancies could play a part in meeting housing need in the borough while there's an undersupply of affordable housing. However, the strategy is effectively a statement of this position rather than a tool that can be used to deliver on that position. Are there any questions on this paper?
Councillor Rowlands, please.
Thank you, Chairman. To some extent, this represents the weakness in our position vis-à-vis, we're almost picking up the tabs, if you like, about letting our property and our council housing. It's difficult in this stage to go through all the restrictions, but is it true that we seem to be picking up the bits and pieces always because of the way we initially rushed into selling off our property some years ago? And we seem to be trying to develop for ourselves some sort of coherent response, possibly with the new government, into doing our housing a lot more consistently and effectively. And that's just an overall position. But going through the paper, there are a whole series of issues that seems to be, that's what in fact we've been restricted to do, to just take the bits and pieces that are left over after having in an early stages sold off our property very, very rapidly without thinking through what our response might be to social housing. But it is hoped that the new government, when it gets its act together, will begin to look at the whole process of social housing and how we might effectively operate around that to improve the situation in our borough. And of course, the fact that we do have a problem of, I think it's nearly 1,000 people still on our waiting list for housing. How best we're going to be able to deal with that and to cope with it.
Do you mind if could you respond to a few of those points, or
Probably Mr. Chinner.
Mr. Chinner, do you want to respond to some of those? I notice relevant officers in the call as well.
So Mr. Chinman's online. I was wondering if Mr. Chinman could answer any of his questions.
Would that be okay? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in terms of the stock transfer, obviously that's over 30 years old now. We're left as a strategic housing authority. So we do have, through our planning and housing policies, influence on the way homes are let. In relation to this specific item, this is just one part of that, and it is a part that really we don't have any teeth to influence housing associations with. We do have a certain amount of control, and we do that through other mechanisms, but the tenancy strategy that's here tonight isn't one of those mechanisms.
Thank you. I think we have to have this strategy. We're legally obliged to have it, but I think, as been said, it doesn't actually have any teeth in terms of changing things by the registered providers, etc. So personally, I have some sympathy with what you said, but in terms of the item here, we are obliged to have one legally, and hence it's being brought forward diligently by the officers. Any other questions?
Let's come back.
Please.
Just to ask, do we actually have ownership of the land, or was the land alienated at the time when we sold our social housing? What's the position as far as
I personally don't know. My understanding is probably the land went with the houses. I'd be very surprised if it didn't.
I believe it was a
Yeah.
full transfer.
Yeah, the whole.
Yeah, it was a full transfer of the housing stock, so all the land as well.
Okay.
I'm afraid we can't turn the clock back 30 years, much as many of us might like to. Okay, any other questions? No. Okay, so without further ado, is the executive happy to agree the recommendation as it stands? Thank you. We move on to the council enforcement policy. Who's taking this one? Councillor Rise, thank you.
Thank you, Leader. I'm pleased to be presenting this report on behalf of Councillor Ashbury, and I would also like to thank the officers who have put this report and policy together. This report is a replacement of the existing version that's on our website and is updated to reflect changes in guidance and provide a more comprehensive summary of how we discharge our regulatory functions. Beneath this core policy, each regulatory service area already has a service-specific policy, which aligns with the principles of good regulation required under the Legislative and Regulatory Reform Act. I'm going through this because I will assume that everyone has read the report, so I would just refer members to the resolution, and to paraphrase, I'm asking the executive to adopt the policy in Appendix A and delegate changes where there is no financial impact to the relevant senior manager, which is the Head of Environment and Leisure, in consultation with the portfolio holder for Homes Planning and Enforcement and the portfolio holder for Net Zero Environment and Leisure. I'm happy to take questions on this report. However, as you appreciate, I am presenting on behalf of Councillor Ashbury. I may not be able to answer everything in detail. However, Miss Greenfield, our Corporate Enforcement Manager, is in attendance online and will be able to answer any questions that members will have.
Thank you. Any questions? I see Councillor Wheeler, please.
Thank you, Leader, and I apologise for the fact that my camera's not in. I'm trying to get back in on my council computer, but I can't get in on one without getting out on the other, and I can't get the timing quite right. I just wanted to ask a question in relation to the enforcement strategy and its links to the strategic goals of the council, because that link doesn't seem to be as strong. And also a question as to whether in the past this policy has been delegated or whether it goes through the normal policy review process of the various other committees that would be looking at different policies. So there's two questions there. The other thing I have to say is reviewing the two policies in parallel. One is very clear in terms of our approach of priorities, and one is a little bit ambiguous, which is the latter. Which is the one that has just come forward. But if I could have confirmation, please, as to how this was previously reviewed and what governance it went through, and also a reason as to why it's no longer linked to our strategic strategies. Thank you.
Sorry, just before Councillor Rise answers, I'm not sure what other policy you're referring to, Councillor Wheeler. Could you just clarify?
The previous policy, the one that this is replacing.
Right, okay. So you're saying that this policy is not linking to the previous policy? Is that the point?
No, I'm saying that this policy doesn't link to our strategic objectives, whereas previously it had done. So it linked to being supportive of the regeneration of Canby Town Centre, the protection of the Green Belt, etc. And also just confirmation as to in the past whether or not this has been a delegated authority policy or whether the policy actually went through the relevant scrutiny committees.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Who wants to have a go at those?
I will ask Ms Greenfield to come in on these, as those are relatively technical questions which I won't be able to answer. Please.
Thank you, Councillor Rise. To the best of my knowledge, and please excuse me if I've got this wrong, and I will go away and check, I believe the previous policy was delegated as well. But like I said, I will go away and check and come back to you, Councillor Wheeler. And your other point about it not being linked to the council's strategic aims, Again, I will take that away and speak to the relevant head of service, or the head of services, should I say, because it goes across too, and the portfolio holders, and again come back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Griffith. I'll come to that point directly. I think, as it mentions in the document, it does link to the priority of protecting our environment, and it also links to the priority of campaigning for residents. If you go to page 6 of the Council Strategy 2024-2028, it refers to maintaining clean streets and smart open spaces, and it also talks about protecting and enhancing our natural environment as some of the sub-themes. Under campaigning for residents, it talks about keeping the borough safe and secure, and listening to and engaging with residents, of which obviously enforcement is a key topic in that process. So it very much does link to the council strategy. Councillor Wheeler, if you look at the detail of it.
I have looked at the detail of it. I think we need to agree to disagree on whether or not it is as strong as the previous policy, and also whether it is quite as clear as the previous policy in terms of what will and won't be enforced. Now, in some respects, I really like this for its I don't want to use the word lack of clarity, because that's not a fair description, but the lack of definite objectives, even that's not quite right. What I like about it is the fact that looking at this policy, each enforcement case will be evaluated on its own merits, as opposed to something which is already laid down and dictated. So there are very different enforcement priorities in Camberley Town Centre to the enforcement priorities in a rural part of the borough. And I think this policy addresses that much more evenly, for which I'm very grateful. It doesn't seem to spell out the protection of the green belt in quite the same way that the previous policy did, but maybe that's because that's no longer a priority of this administration.
I think it is a priority of this administration. I think that's also clearly in the council strategy. So we'll agree to disagree on that point as well. Councillor Rice, please.
Thank you. I just want to refer back to my introduction where it says that, so this is a core policy, and underneath this core policy, each service area has its own service-specific policy, so which will set out its clear strategies and how it relates to the corporate strategy of the council. I would also just hit back on that very loaded question about it not being the council's not clearly from Councillor Wheeler about not wanting to protect the green belt. I think we as an administration have been very clear about our desire to protect the green belt within the local plan that we've brought forward, as well as other aspects as well. So I think that's was a cheap shot.
I'm delighted to receive
No,
it.
thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Thank you. Enough. Okay. Anybody else got any other points? No, I've just got one small one. Well, I'll come back in a second if there's more upstairs. Thanks. Just a small one. Maybe it's, again, I'm having linguistic issues today, which it might be the case. I've got one coming up later, perhaps. But it says on page 38, I think, of the policy, actually 38 of the Modern Gov file, sorry. It says that it will be reviewed every 2 years when a change in relevant legislation or statutory guidance occurs, or where there is a change in service. I'm just wondering whether there's an or missing after every 2 years. So every 2 years, or when there's a change in legislation.
I will refer to Ms Greenfield on this one, but I would just say that there is a comma. I would say it's a list. So it's saying it will be reviewed every 2 years when a change in relevant legislation or statutory guidance, or when there is a change in service structure. But I will refer to Ms Greenfield just for clarity on that.
We can certainly add in, or it might read a little bit better. So yes, we'll take that away, Leader.
Thank you. Like I say, probably more an issue with me today than anybody else. The other thing is I spotted, and it's a really small thing, but just for clarity, I think it had in this document still had a reference to City Council or something. I'm just trying to find the page, which was struck out in the final version. Maybe that could just be cleaned up. Oh yeah, City Solicitors, that's right. It's on page 43, third paragraph up. Just needs probably tidied up in the final version. Is that okay with officers?
Yep, absolutely fine. Yep.
See, we do read it. That's why you leave them in there for us to find. Okay, Councillor Whitcroft, please.
Thank you, Lee. I hesitate to get involved in the controversy between yourselves and Councillor Wheeler, but I'm going to hope. I'd like to welcome the strategy as laid out. It's a very worthwhile document. The problem I have with it is one of resource. It's all very well a strategy, but
Councillor Whitcroft, we are really struggling to hear you. You're like a dialect. Is there any chance, I don't know what's best to do, whether you come out and come back in again, or do you want to try speaking right into the speaker and see if that helps? If that's okay. Thank you, Councillor.
I'm not sure it's worth hearing anyway, but is that any better?
It is a bit better, thank you.
Okay, I'll try and speak clearly. Unfortunately, based on my own experience, the whole enforcement function has not been treated well, in my opinion, by previous administrations in terms of the amount of resource that it's been given. As a member of the Planning Applications Committee, it's true to say that every time there is a report given on enforcement activity, it becomes crystal clear that we're trying to push a rock uphill with the amount of resource we are devoting to it. I think the officers involved deserve every congratulation for the efforts that they make, but the plain fact of the matter is that there ain't enough of them. And all I would say is that as part of the forthcoming budget review process, and possibly any kind of review of the strategies which have been mentioned, we should perhaps revisit this with a view to seeing if there is something we can do about the resource issue. Because, as I say, we are struggling, certainly on the planning front, with the enforcement issue. It is not a problem with the existing officer team. It is, in my opinion, a problem of resource, and that is something which we might be able to look at over the course of the next couple of years. And I'm even understanding the stricken nature of our financial position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitcroft. Obviously, today we're talking about the policy, but you're absolutely not the performance. But you're absolutely right to emphasise the connection between the two, because policy then influences the resources required. I know myself there has been a lot of discussion around planning enforcement resources. There actually hasn't been a lot of facts on the table about what the situation is, and I know that's something the officers are working on. I know there's a perception, but let's get some facts on the table in terms of exactly what the number of cases are, how long they're taking to solve, whether the issue is in fact with this council and its officers, not with the officers but with the volume of work, or whether it is actually with other bodies, in which case we'll be happy to write to whoever we need to write to. We have already raised the challenges of working with the Planning Inspectorate with the MP, and we'll start to solicit his support in getting their resourcing looked at, because I think everything that we are hearing from the new government means there's going to be a lot more heading their way in the months ahead, and that will continue to be months and years ahead, and that will continue to be a disabler to some of the enforcement activities. But with those general statements, but I do think it's important we get some facts on the table first before we have this conversation about resources, or we have the conversation about where we are relative to prior years or prior periods. I'll hand over to Mr. Chinner for a little bit of extra detail and perhaps an insight into when we expect to see that feedback on the data.
Thank you, Leader. So, in relation to the comments by Councillor Whitcroft, I know from the previous meeting at Planning Committee there were various comments raised by councillors in regards to moving on enforcement cases, and we've taken stock of those comments collectively as a team, and myself working with Miss Greenfield and also the planning team, we are making sure that we move forward on these cases. In terms of updates and resourcing, we will provide a further update at the next Planning Committee meeting, which is due in October for corporate enforcement, and hopefully by that point we will provide some more reassurance to members that we are moving these high-profile cases forward, which were highlighted at Planning Committee last month.
Councillor Whitcroft, did you want to come back, or is that an old hand?
No, that's not an old hand, but it's a very brief hand. I just want to say that I welcome your comments and I welcome the comments of Mr. Chinner. I would actually make the point, however, that it's not only the high profile cases which are of concern. It is the more mundane ones. I won't waste your time by listing any of those, but there are a large number of very minor matters which nevertheless are important to residents, and which I'm not sure at the moment are getting adequate attention. Nevertheless, as I say, I welcome both your comments and the Mr. Chinner as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitcroft. So, as I said, let's get some data, see where we are, the complex stuff and the simple stuff, and the average time to resolve, and then we can make informed decisions. But that is not per se something for today. That's for another day. Today it's about the policy side of things. Any other points from anybody? Again, just to thank everybody involved in preparing this. It's very comprehensive and appropriate as well, and balanced. So yeah, appreciate that. Are we happy with the recommendation as it's given? Executive members agreed. Thank you. Okay. Community development grants. It's a takeover bid tonight.
Thank you. In advance of this item and indeed the remaining items on the agenda, I will thank the officers who have pulled together these papers. Mrs. Kipping and Mrs. France have done a fantastic job as always. Community grants policy. An essential part of our council strategy is to improve fairness, openness and transparency in the way the council operates. The Community Development Grants Policy has been developed to provide a clear framework for the principles and criteria that guide the Council's decision-making processes for grants awarded through the Council's community development function. This is important as it helps our community groups understand the principles that sit behind decisions to award or not to award grants. These grants currently include revenue grants, ward councillor grants, community fund grants, emergency food, fuel and energy grants and the join-in scheme grants. Whilst all grants have their own criteria available on our website, having knowledge of the principles that sit behind these criteria is important for groups to understand our decision making. The policy will also apply to future grants developed and offered via the Community Development Service, and whilst individual grants will continue to have their own specific criteria for applicants to follow, this policy will provide the overarching approach for all grant making decisions and awards. This also supports our work to facilitate a flourishing voluntary sector in order to promote healthier and more inclusive communities. Are there any questions on the paper?
No? Okay, just to echo your comments, thanks very much to the people that prepared this. Puts us in good shape going forward to have these have these things in place. So, executive, are we happy with the recommendation as it stands? Agreed. Okay. We move on to item 9, also with you.
Thank you. Non-cashable grants and subsidies policy, it's similar, I think, to the previous policy. This policy links closely with the community grants policy and is part of our strategic aim to increase openness and transparency in decision making. The policy aims to explain how decisions over community rental subsidies agreed with our community groups, as well as parking facilities, are made in order to improve consistency and fairness in decision making. It also intends to ensure that we're making decisions in a way that supports community groups, but is also fair to residents when thinking about the income to the council. Finally, it requires those who receive a non-cashable subsidy or grant to prove that they work to support the strategic aims of the council, providing value and impact to residents and ensuring that they are inclusive and can be accessed by all. Thank you.
Okay, any questions on this one? No? Okay. So are we happy with the recommendation as it stands, executive members? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Marching swiftly on. Deep Cut Village Centre 106, also back with you.
Thank you. When the community centre at Deep Cut was built, part of the planning permission required an amount of money to be set aside for the maintenance of the building during its lifetime. This Section 106 grant is held by the council and is council money, but it can only be used for the purposes intended. The trustees of Deep Cut Village Association hold the lease of the community centre, which is a full repairing lease, so they must arrange and pay for all repairs. Currently, there is no delegated process to allow trustees to have access to those funds. As the building ages, access to the funds becomes more and more important, as does consideration for what happens to repairs on the building when these funds become exhausted. This paper sets out a proactive maintenance process that agrees a maintenance programme in advance, that it ensures that funds are available to trustees quickly in an emergency for smaller planned repairs, ensures that should unexpected or larger maintenance be required, officers are involved at each stage, ensures that a fair procurement process is developed with trustees, ensures that when the fund is exhausted, the trustees have planned and been supported to ensure that the building can continue to provide valuable community space. The trustees are aware of these proposals and are supportive of the process as suggested, and it can be resourced from current council resources in terms of oversight. Thank you.
Any questions, anyone? Gosh, we should have more meetings like this. Brilliant, brilliant document. Well done, officers. And, Councillor Whitcoff.
Sorry, I was just about to echo that comment. As long as the trustees don't end up at some future date with a huge outstanding bill.
Councillor Whitcroft, you've gone back into Dalek mode again. Try turning the camera off, will you? See if that helps with the bandwidth. It might just be somebody's watching too many movies in your house. Thank you. Try that.
I wish that was the case. Is that any better?
It's a little bit better, thank you.
Well, I'll be very brief. Thank you for the document. Hopefully, the trustees will be safeguarded into the future, and a very useful and popular facility is allowed to continue to flourish. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Whitcroft. Okay, and I think the essence of the document says that we'll try and support them in that regard into the long term as well, because ultimately they need to take responsibility for balancing their books and using this money wisely into way off into the future for other generations to come. So, yep, thank you for that. I don't think I've got any other questions on this one. So, are we happy to approve with the? Can't agree before I've said, are we happy to agree? Otherwise, the monitoring officer is going to tell you off. Right, agreed. Thank you. Okay, we move on to Youth Council update.
Thank you. This paper provides the Executive with an update on the progress made since the last paper on this topic. It requests that further updates and reports are now considered by the Community and Resident Working Group, which has now started to meet, and we ask for a report to come back by the end of the academic year 24-25. It may be this evening that the Executive may consider that delegating decisions relating to the future of the Youth Council may now be made by the Head of Performance and Communications in consultation with the portfolio holder, following any progress report to the Communities and Resident Working Group. If it is felt that this is useful, then a possible wording of a resolution could be: the Executive are asked to resolve that future decisions relating to the Youth Council may now be delegated to the Head of Performance and Communications in consultation with the relevant portfolio holder and the Resident Services and Communities Working Group. So it is just a small tweak. Does anybody have any comments?
So was that a proposed amendment then?
Yes, it is a tweak to the resolution in the paper.
Can we have another listen then? Is that
Certainly.
okay? And then we'll open it out to other members.
Certainly. The Executive are asked to resolve that the future decisions relating to the Youth Council may now be delegated to the Head of Performance and Communications in consultation with the relevant portfolio holder and the Resident Services and Communities Working Group. We just felt it needed a bit of strengthening.
Is that in addition to this or instead of?
Instead of.
Instead of. Okay. Okay, Councillor Rice.
Thank you. I actually have no problem with that amendment. My concern would be just the removal of the kind of the deadline of the end of the academic year. So I'm wondering if we could amend the amendment to keep that in the recommendation as well.
Yes, absolutely. We can add that in. So we can. Are you happy for us to tweak the wording of that to reflect the date? Yeah. Yeah.
And just to be clear, that would, in terms of resource implications, that would be on the basis that the resourcing, as expected and hoped for, will come from other sources. Is that correct?
Are you referring to funding?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, funding. Sorry, I meant funding.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm having linguistic issues.
It's okay. Yes, we are working very closely with the provider to support them in securing funding, but ultimately the responsibility of that lies with them. But we are offering every support possible. The officers are, and I am as well.
How does the section 151 feel about that proposed amendment to the resolution? Does that still allow good governance, taking on board the comment there around funding would be managed? So it's because in essence, what was happening was this was coming back here because of potential funding issues. Now the funding's not coming from this body and it's offers a time to manage. I don't see a problem with the delegation, but just thought I'd check.
Thank you, Leader. It is obviously constitutionally any extra funding will have to be approved either by council or by the executive as a supplementary estimate during the year. So, provided it's within budgets, then there's no problem with the delegation. If you are then asking for more money, that can only be provided by the executive at this point in time.
Yeah,
Even if it is grant funded.
So provided the officer time is reasonable, then there is no significant drain on council resources. So I'm relaxed with the amendment as proposed. Did I see this amendment before and missed it, or I probably didn't see it? Okay, that's fine.
Apologies.
No. I'm just feeling like Johnny Cope now. Councillor Rice, please.
Thank you. I just wonder if, just for clarity, if it would be useful to add in a further line, which was similar to the recommendation that was in the corporate enforcement policy, where, and it was about the delegation, where it said to make any subsequent changes to the policy where there is no financial implication, just to add that line in, just to be I take what Mr. Watson has just said, and they would have to come back here, but just to add in clear language that any financial decision relating to the Youth Council would have to come back to executive, no matter what, or the relevant body.
Makes sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to give Lisa just a second to see if she's got all of that captured, and then she's going to give it one more time to be sure.
Okay.
Yeah, here we go.
All right, bear with me then. The executive are asked to resolve that future decisions relating to the Youth Council, where there are no financial implications, may now be delegated to the Head of Performance and Communications in consultation with the relevant portfolio holder and the Resident Services and Communities Working Group. By the end of the academic year 24-25. So the additions to that are where there's no financial implication and by the end of the academic year 24-25.
Perfect. My learned colleague thinks it should be HR, Performance and Communications, but I don't know, is that correct, Ms. Kipping, or are you currently trading as a different entity in your interim role? HR, Performance and Communications, so, right.
Duly amended.
Subsequent to this, a piece of paper is going to come over to you but I think we've all captured the essence of that. Are we suitably agreed on that? Agreed. But nobody's got their hands up. Oh, okay, I'm terribly sorry. They're queued up here waiting with questions. Right, please, Councillor Claret. Try Councillor Rowlands. Bear with us.
Right, yep, I'm on this one. Mine were just questions about the Youth Council, really, because I think it's a really good idea. I notice there are currently 5 young people regularly attending. Do you know, are they all from the same school or from 2 or 3 schools? That's my first question.
Thank you, Councillor Claret. They are from a mixture of schools and the reach is wider than that. So although there are 5 core members who attend meetings regularly, they also do a lot of outreach work on social media and other projects. So they have a further reach than just that 5.
I know one of the things you say is you want to get more members. And one thing I noticed they met every week. I know 1 week virtually, 1 week, next week in person. Do you think that puts people off? Because it's quite a commitment. I mean, are their meetings about an hour long or what?
Thank you. Yes, my understanding is they meet for an hour and a half. Meetings are weekly. There's no obligation to attend every single week, though. So there's flexibility within that. And I think the offering of in-person and virtual lends itself to a more flexible kind of attendance as well.
Right, thank you very much for that. Just one further question. Is there actually a maximum number that could be on the Youth Council? Say, there's a great influx of people all wanting to be on it. Are there any plans for a limit?
There's no formal limit on it. I think they are aiming to have around 15 regular attendees within the next term, and then I think they'll evaluate and see how things go.
Thank you.
Please, Councillor Rowlands.
Yes, many years ago I served on a youth council associated with Surrey County Council. They had a committee, a youth committee. Have there been any attempts to actually find out what the county are doing? I know they run the youth club on the Old Dean, and there always has been indications there may be something else provided in the community. But are we talking to the county? I know this is a question that came up earlier about what their policies on the youth service actually are currently. I'm not aware that there's a county youth council at the moment.
We have been talking to county. We've been speaking to them specifically around how we can make sure that our young people's voices are heard at county level, and around funding that may be available. But our interactions with them have been limited, I think, which has been the case in lots of different areas when we've been trying to deal with county. Nevertheless, we will continue that dialogue. But as you know, Councillor Rowlands, and I know all too well as an ex-youth worker that county services for youth have been absolutely decimated over the last 15 years. So we are contending with that as well. And at the moment, we really just want to make what we're offering here in Surrey Heath functional and successful for the young people here.
In a number of areas, the police have actually assisted having a service that relates to community behaviour and community facilities. Has that been explored?
Are you referring to the project recently started in the town centre? You are. So I personally haven't had dialogue with them, but I will signpost the Youth Council workers to those. But it is quite a different project, though, what the police service are offering. It is, what they're doing is to combat antisocial behaviour. It's not about involving young people in the democratic processes. But nevertheless, I'm sure there are some collaborations that would potentially be brought to fruition by some dialogue.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rowlands. I think anything we can do to keep our young people engaged and out of mischief is a positive thing. I think we've seen too many cases recently of young people getting themselves into a bit of a mess, including here locally in at Rushmore. So yes, please, Councillor Rice.
One question came to mind. Can we, engagements with the Youth Council, find ways to kind of bridge links between us as the Borough Council and with the Youth Council? And I'm thinking potentially through the External Partnerships Committee for them to come in, present to the committee also, so they can be directly involved with the democratic process we do here.
Absolutely, and when I met with them at the end of the summer term, we discussed that very thing. We discussed the possibility of coming in to ask questions to executive, and indeed inviting portfolio holders and other council members to come and speak to them at their meetings. So yes, that is absolutely happening.
And I don't think we've killed the idea of a youth mayor either. It's just we need to get a functioning and coherent group up and running that can to make that worthwhile for all parties, I think, Councillor Rice. Okay. So thank you for correcting me earlier, Councillor Rice, as well. I was so excited about the amended amendment. Are we in agreement with that then overall? Do we want it read again, or have we got enough to work with? Enough to work with? Yeah, enough to work with. Okay. We're agreed. Thank you. I want it duly noted as I close the meeting that with the S151 in the chair, we've managed to spend no money today, and I don't know whether that's deliberate or accidental, but it is an outcome nevertheless.
This is the way it should always be.
Yeah. So thanks everybody very much, everybody, and we'll see each other, I'm sure, shortly. Take care. Bye now.